Hello and welcome to Media 7. America's economy and America's election have rightly captured world media attention this year. But tonight we look elsewhere. We'll start in China, whose booming economy has been held out as a potential saviour for the troubled economies of the West. These two reports, one from Al Jazeera, the other from The Guardian website, suggest otherwise.
This is the man whose efforts US Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson says will save the global economy. Farmer Wang Zhenyuan's income may not amount to much, but combined with that of his 1.3 billion compatriots, it makes up one of the mightiest forces in the global economy. But how does he feel about being called to the financial aid of some of the richest countries in the world?
There are many countries poorer than the United States. Why should we help them? Just because they say they need it, we can't just help anyone who asks for it.
7,000 worked here. But these scattered toys in a locked factory yard are all that's left of manufacturing giant Smart Union. It churned out plastic toys for Mattel, Hasbro and Disney. But now its 3 plants are shuttered. Earlier this month, it went into liquidation.
This is just one of the thousands of factories right across the Pearl River Delta which have already closed their doors. And as the global downturn accelerates, workers are wondering whether China's economic miracle can really weather the storm.
An excerpt there from a rather beautifully shot video report, not from a TV station, but from a newspaper, The Guardian. We're joined now by 3 journalists working in countries where no New Zealand media organisation has a correspondent. Jamil Andolini left New Zealand a decade ago, barely out of a journalism course. Now he's the Deputy Chief of the Financial Times Beijing Bureau and an established commentator on the Chinese economy. Anna Fifield has also covered Asia for the FT. Until recently, she was the paper's correspondent in South Korea. Now she's in the Middle East. And Dr. Sudha Ramachandran teaches and practices journalism in the thriving Indian city of Bangalore, specialising in politics and security. Welcome to you all. Jamil, if we could start with you, and with respect to the 2 excerpts from the reports on China that we showed, Henry Paulson was dreaming if he thought that China was going to bail the West out, wasn't he?
Well, I think, China's got its own problems domestically, but it's also not immune to what's happening in the rest of the world. So its banks and its insurance companies, its financial system is somewhat insulated because it hasn't bought all of the toxic assets that the Americans were selling particularly Americans over the last few years were selling. But the problem is that the export industry is very reliant, of course, on the US and on Europe. And as those economies slow right down, you see these factory closures all across southern and eastern China. And you've seen economic growth slow from 12% last year to 9% in the 3rd quarter. Now, most countries would be very happy with 9%, obviously, but that's a big drop for China, and I think we're probably going to see it get a lot worse.
I thought it was interesting that they had to go to 2 relatively unconventional sources. Al Jazeera, certainly in New Zealand, is not a mainstream channel, and The Guardian website, to get that kind of reporting. I wonder whether the Western world is not actually getting a particularly good picture of the Chinese economy at the moment.
Well, I've got a sort of... I would like to defend the Western media in the sense that it's very hard to know what's going on in China. We have a debate almost on a daily basis. I'm a bear on China, but some of my colleagues are much more bullish and they're more cautious. And I think probably they have they've got a point. Is that the data that comes out of China, it's not always so reliable, and not only that, it's also very hard to get a picture of.
So everyone's guessing?
Everyone is guessing to a certain extent. And the 2 reports we saw are, they're a little sort of, they haven't been done by financial journalists so much. They've been done by, people who've picked up on a theme, the factory's closing. Other industries are still doing quite well, some industries. Now, I think the real worry for China is that it's not just exports, which make up quite a large part of the economy, but are not the only thing that China does. It's the property market in China is also stalled. And, I think that's a real concern. And so, but at any one time, trying to pick what's really going on especially in the economy there, it's very hard.
Now, Anna, you, up until 2 months ago, you were reporting from Seoul, South Korea, where the economic story at the moment seems to be a massive amount of pump priming by the government there.
Yes.
Billions of dollars.
Yeah, certainly South Korea has been the worst hit in Asia, I think, by this financial crisis, mainly because it's this huge exporting nation. It's very reliant on global demand, and also because of the kind of products it builds. Like, for example, shipbuilding, it's #1 in the world, but these ships take 3 years to build, so they have a lot of kind of fancy foreign currency instruments that they use to make sure that the ships are still worth their value when they do actually sell
Now,
them.
New Zealand has clearly a strong interest in China. Do we have the same economic and political interest in South Korea? Does it matter as much to us?
Well, I mean, there's only one China. Obviously, China is a big economic superpower, but South Korea is very important. It's New Zealand's 7th largest trading partner, buys a lot of butter and meat and like deer products as well. But also, increasingly, there's lots of tie-ups between the film industry, and there are lots of New Zealanders in Korea now, either in business or teaching English. So, yeah, I think it is important.
So, yeah.
And a lot of
clearly.
Koreans here in New Zealand as well, learning English. So there's a lot of exchange going on.
Sudha, your specialty is regional security and politics. As the whole financial crisis story cycle was warming up, one day there was a story saying that Pakistan was basically broke. And I thought, gee, should I worry about that? And that story was gone the next day. Can you help me? Should I worry about the fact that Pakistan may not be able to pay its army?
I think we need to worry because Pakistan has very few weeks, just a few, I think until the end of the year, to meet its international financial obligations. And I think and Pakistan's, its friends, Saudi Arabia and China, it was hoping that they would help it out, and they haven't. So it will be turning to the IMF most probably. And if the IMF is going to loan Pakistan money, it's going to come with conditions. Now, it's not clear what kind of conditions the IMF will impose, but it could be cutbacks on defense spending, which is going to annoy the military, and maybe taxes, increased taxes, which is going to make the public angrier. So the civilian government, which is already, its hold is so tenuous, I think it's going to be weakened.
How much is, and not just in Pakistan, how much is internal security in the region predicated on economic growth? Because there are any number of Asian economies that have boomed in the last 5 years. Is there a security concern if that stops happening?
Not so much in, say, India, for instance, because I think the sectors which would be affected would be the software sector and, say, or the stock markets and realty. But otherwise, it's not going to be so affected by the recession as such. If there is going to be a threat, an internal security threat, that's more because the government has not, successive governments have not addressed the issue of rural poverty. And there we have, the problem of the Maoist problem. And that is a very, very serious threat. I think the world knows about, the terrorist threat to India, the jihadi threat, the Hindu fundamentalist threat now. But what nobody's talking about is the Maoist threat, which is very serious.
Well, we've heard about that in the context of Nepal. Are you talking about there's a wider issue there?
Indian Maoists. I mean, we've had a Maoist problem for several decades now. But over the last few years, they actually control territory in central India. And there's a very, very ugly war going on there.
And of course, Jamil, there's talk of unrest in China if the economic boom slows. I don't know whether you've caught up with it. Wen Jiabao actually wrote something saying we are in danger of social unrest. Was that quite an extraordinary thing for him to do?
In recent years, actually, you've seen the Communist Party come out a number of times and say if growth drops below a certain level, we won't be able to control the social unrest, and we will have, it'll be Armageddon. The Communist Party.
So that's a fairly common media message for him.
It's leaked to the media in various ways. It's not necessarily done in such a straightforward way, but definitely, internally at least, and leaked through various channels, they make it clear that they need to maintain growth at a certain level because what you have.
So is he just scaring people, or is this a genuine attempt to reach out and say, we're worried?
It's impossible to know what's in the mind of Wen Jiabao. He doesn't give interviews very ever. But the thing is that what he's probably doing is enforcing the message that China will not be unaffected by this, and that China needs to also worry about the global financial crisis. But he's making a point which I try and make all the time, is that the political system in China is actually not able to withstand a pronounced downturn in the economy, just because there are no pressure release valves of elections and or being able to choose your leaders or even air your grievances. You're not allowed to protest in China, and there is no free media. So
Anna, you've been covering another rather interesting region, and you've written a few stories recently about Iran and the impact of slumping oil prices. How's that playing out there? Are the people blaming Ahmadinejad, or are they blaming America? Well, is this being seen as an American crisis there?
Well, it hasn't really started to hit in Iran yet. It's looming. But it's very funny because as this global crisis started to break, in Iran, many of the senior religious leaders and things were saying this was divine retribution to America for all of its, terrible ways, and it's got what was coming to it, and that capitalism didn't work. And now they're feeling the flip side of that oil prices are coming off the boil, and in a few months' time that will begin to hurt Iran. Basically because Ahmadinejad has run this very populist policies of just channeling all these billions of dollars of oil money into the economy, and that has enabled him to remain popular and things. And so while oil prices were $150, he had a lot of money to slosh around, and he could mask a lot of economic mismanagement. Now, $70 and still falling, it will really tie his hands. So they think that maybe he can survive if oil prices remain above 60, but once they hit 55, he's in real trouble. So this is a big deal for Ahmadinejad because he's going into an election next year and he wants a second term. So this will probably fuel some popular unrest with his policies.
This does sound like one to watch. We might continue that afterwards. We have to go to a break now, and we'll come back with a disturbance in the force at APN.